Greetings. This is Rosalind Parks with National Network View News. NNV Medical Contributor Dr. Akili Muhammad shares with us the many public concerns about the various COVID-19 variants and the impact of mandatory vaccinations. Later, Sister Sherrie Muhammad, founder and director of Asiatic Minds online school, explains the role of independent education and what it does for the fall of America, which is at hand, and as we begin to separate from this current system. Before we get into the top news, let's do a recap of the current events we've recently covered. NNV Medical Contributor Dr. Akili Muhammad discussed public concerns about the COVID-19 pandemic and the refusal of hospital personnel to comply with mandatory vaccinations requirements, forcing the closure of a hospital birthing unit. Now, Dr. Akili, New York has had public rallies in addition to healthcare workers not desiring to deliver babies over vaccine mandates. What does this speak to?
From my vantage, I think it's two separate issues. I think it is one of the first signs of unity amongst healthcare workers that are not willing to subjugate themselves to a vaccine that they are still highly questioning. And I think the other view that I have is that we're looking at this medical community start to prioritize what they think should be prioritized and kind of push to the side what they don't prioritize. And one of those things will probably be childcare. And so I think as a Black community, as poor people in general in this country, we have to start thinking from the idea that the majority of births around the world happen without a hospital.
Global View contributor and Final Call News staff writer Brian E. Muhammad joined us to give insight on the current situation of U.S. national sanctions, their history around the globe, and how such sanctions have caused instability in Haiti. Brother Brian, how many nations does the United States have under sanctions?
In all, the United States have 39 nations under sanctions.
What percentage of those U.S. sanctioned nations are on the continent of Africa?
Well, that's a good question, because out of all of the nations on the earth, it's pretty much predominantly the darker nations that are sanctioned. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about Africa, Africa makes up 1/3 of the 39, a third of the total number of nations America has under sanctions are in Africa alone.
On the I Have a Testimony show, NNV News anchor Willie Muhammad re-aired the special broadcast with guest Risa Islam. Their conversation covered information still relevant today, including the COVID-19 pandemic, medical exemptions, and the impact of COVID-19 as schools opened up to the public.
As these children facilities and schools are starting to be reopened, what advice would you give to parents and those who are watching that when they are faced with the dilemma when the school system and other places of work want them to take the vaccinations, what could be what are some of their courses of action that they can take or we can take?
Yes, sir. First thing is, depending on what state you are in, meaning out of the 50 states in the United States, depending on which one you are in will let you know which exemptions you have. There are 3 exemptions, meaning 3 different forms or 3 different reasons that you can give the government or the school district so that your child will not be forced to take vaccinations. One of those is the medical exemption form. The other is the philosophical exemption form. The other is the religious exemption form. As of right now, California, Mississippi, and West Virginia are the only 3 states that do not have the religious, and I believe they worked on the other 2 as well. But for the other 47 states, they, for the vast majority, have all 3.
I spoke with Global View contributor and Final Call News staff writer Brian E. Muhammad about the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's press conference held days after the tragedy of 9/11 in 2001. One of the things that we notice in the media is the lies that come out about the things that they claim minister has said, as well as the lies about what they claim the Nation of Islam stands for. Would you say that the minister, in calling them heroes, in that instance, has shown us by example that we could rise above any personal issues that we have during a great time of tragedy and come together?
Yes, yes, and it's very important because that sentiment is the crux of the problem that the United States government, with its sordid history of oppression against Black people, its oppression against the red, its oppression against the brown, its oppression against poor whites, and the dirt that it has done worldwide, that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has been a faithful warner to America to change course.
Asiatic Mind student sister Sanaya Muhammad and brother Nicholas Muhammad spoke about how they are connecting with their instructors and classmates, as well as their interests in a variety of subjects. Nicholas, we'll go to you first. Give us some tips on how you stay focused in the online classroom and avoid distractions.
Well, first of all, you need to find a quiet space with no distractions and a place where you usually do work. I usually just go and do my work in the basement because it's quieter there. And another one is, the key is I usually don't have anything else on my table except laptop, notebooks, pencils, and other materials that are used for schoolwork, and nothing more than that.
Okay. Global View contributor Brian E. Muhammad, Final Call News writer, discussed 20 years of war in Afghanistan and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's October 2002 letter to President George W. Bush regarding America's warmongering. After the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York, then President George W. Bush accused the Taliban of sheltering Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and they also claimed that they were responsible for the tragedy. After 20 years of war, was Bush's allegations ever proven?
Well, they accused Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and yes, they did accuse the Taliban of sheltering Osama bin Laden, against being held accountable for this accusation for 9/11, and they used that as a pretext, as a false flag, in fact, to go into Afghanistan and go to war in Afghanistan, and to use this as a pretext for this so-called war on terror.
Medical contributor Dr. Akili Muhammad discussed public concerns about the COVID-19 variants, future strains, and mounting evidence that the vaccinated people are the spreaders. Now, should the public be worried about this and the future strains at all?
Well, like I say, if anybody has been infected, and, to me, I think it's very difficult for anybody in the world, again, as I said before, unless you live in very remote places. If you live in any type of congested urban area, you probably have been exposed to it. Okay. And so if you have been sick from the coronavirus, any of the strains, any of the mutations, or if you have been exposed and your body fought it off, you are very well protected. And it's been shown in many parts of the world that a person who has been infected has much better antibody and much better protection than any vaccine. And we're talking about all the different vaccines around the world. They are not comparing to your natural immunity. So we have to go back to believing in God, understanding that our immune system came from God. So if you do the things that takes care of that, or you've been infected and you got over it, you're protected. So, fear should go down. Continue to be careful, but fear should go down and our confidence should go up that we're going to be okay.
Sister Colette discussed food preservation and canning techniques, an important skill to have during this unprecedented time. Sister Colette, when did you start canning?
Okay, one of my favorite questions to answer. Well, to say when I first started canning, I have to qualify how I learned how to can in the first place. So just briefly, I'm an MGT, so I'm a registered member of the Nation of Islam. Okay, and so the sisters, the females in the Nation of Islam, we have 7 training units, and those training units are how to keep house, how to rear our children, how to take care of our husbands, sew, cook, and just in general, how to act at home and abroad. And so approximately the year 2015, 16, around thereabouts, we were in our cooking curriculum. And so the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who is the absolute head of our class, okay, he gave us the instruction to learn the skill of canning. And so that's how it began.
Let's pause for announcements from our sponsors. Then Dr. Akili Muhammad will join us for his weekly medical update. We'll be right back.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Your support helps us to highlight solutions for a brighter tomorrow. Go to nnvnews.com/donate.
Asiatic Minds, online education, helping our children to discover their God-given skills, gifts, talents, and passion that will allow them to see their greatness, as well as the greatness of our people. And upon discovering that greatness, infusing them with the desire to use it for the betterment of themselves, their families, our people, and the world. Call now, 502-219-4848.
This is Sister Sajda Muhammad. We are proud to announce that the Sajda House commemorative Elijah coins are finally here. This priceless heirloom, made from recycled copper from the messenger's home, is now available at sajdahouse.com.
The hashtag Bank Black social media campaign made strides not only in revolutionizing how we bank, but also how we think. The movement inspired thousands of African Americans across the country to transfer or deposit millions of dollars into Black-owned banks. These are banks that will invest in urban communities, employ African Americans, support Black businesses, and inspire Black home ownership. This is a very proud moment for our culture as we are taking small, but significant, steps towards building Black power through Black wealth.
Thank you for tuning in to NNV News. Please share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. Follow us on social media at NNV News, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, National Network View. This is Clifton Muhammad with NNVnews.com.
As the NBA puts pressure on players to get vaccinated, we should question how the NBA's process of vaccination pressure is affecting our young people's minds. Joining us is medical contributor Dr. Akili with the Ultimate Wellness Group to discuss further.
How are you?
Greetings, sir.
Greetings.
Dr. Akili, what does the NBA's increasingly apparent process of vaccination pressure do for our young people's minds?
I work in neighborhoods and do a lot of work with the youth, and there are two aspects of society, in my personal viewpoint, that are extremely influential with our young, especially brothers, but young people in general. And that's the athletes and the musicians, rappers, singers, actors, all the entertainers. And to me, what I have seen in the last few days, it makes me consider that the power that some of these young brothers are showing by being resistant or not having a conversation, keeping their ideas private, is something I think that shows strength. And it's something that we haven't seen, I would say, since Colin Kaepernick stood up. And we know after the years of Colin Kaepernick pretty much being whiteballed out the league, there were a few people that stood with him continuously, but the majority of people went back to things as normal. And so I'm happy to see, and I'm praying that the young people are looking at this and gathering some strength, because not only is there an influence on the youth, but there also is a stance that we need to take as Black people, and especially as Black athletes, against this imposter Jews that have a tendency to use them up and then throw them away when they're finished.
Good point. Now, is the attention being paid to our athletes beneficial at all for our youth?
I think it is, you know what, because there are just so many of our youth that have a plan to be an athlete or some type of entertainer. That's the more easy route. That's the more flashy route. That's the quick route, rather than the, go to school and grind it out and whatever the case may be, or, go get a trade or to become an entrepreneur and wait for the time that it takes for that to build itself. And so I think when we're looking at the type of attention that our young people pay, I think it's a good thing. Not necessarily that I want them to tell them or people to make one decision. Your decision is your own. But to see these young men to stand up like they are and not giving in to the pressure, I think is a beautiful example for our young people to use in their future, no matter what aspect of society they wind up in.
Yes, sir. Now, one of the players asked about the difference between infection with and without vaccination. How do you believe that will affect those who are paying attention?
Yeah, I think that was Brandon Beal, I think his name is. I know his last name is Bill. I may be wrong on his first name, but he was discussing, in essence, it was an interview, and he asked the interviewers, isn't the chance of me getting infected with the vaccine just like I have a chance of being infected without the vaccine? And he kind of just paused and waited for them to give an answer. I couldn't hear what the answers were, but the way he posed his questions and the way that he spoke, I think that he's done some research. He has some knowledge, and he's basing his decision on gathering information and then coming to a conclusion, rather than like other people like Damian Lillard from the Portland Trailblazers. And I'm not saying this to say anything negative about him. I respect him as well. But he came out and talked about the fact that he and all of his family members got vaccinated because some of his family members died. So his statements were those of fear, whereas Brandon Beal's statements were that of, okay, let me do my research. Let me put my thinking cap on. Let me look at the climate of what's going on around me and make a decision in my own time. I think that's highly respectable.
Yes, sir. Now, being that many of our youth are those that are unvaccinated, how will this affect their confidence with this government?
I think when we listen to a person like Brandon Beal, right, and I have to go back to a statement that a white woman newscaster said to LeBron James years ago, just shut up and dribble. That is the perspective of white America on athletes and entertainers. You entertain me. And when it's political questions or other things in society, just be quiet. And I think this is powerful because it's starting to change the reality. Colin Kaepernick was one thing, but I think a lot of young people saw how he kind of got whiteballed out the league. And so that may be a little negative, but now we're watching it happen again. And I think it's going to start fostering a spirit like there was in the 50s and the 60s when Black athletes were standing strong. And most of the time, things didn't come out very well for them, but their impact on society was great. And so I think, with this Muhammad Ali thing coming out just a few days ago, and this reality that's happening right now, even with the naysayers, even with all the people that are going to say something negative, I think the impact on young Black and brown and indigenous people is eventually going to show that it was positive.
And one thing I want to ask you, Dr. Akili, is how does Minister Louis Farrakhan's Criterion speech tie in with these current events?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I think the minister worldwide was the first, let's say, so-called big name that spoke against vaccines, that spoke against this being something that these people would be able to overcome. After his speech, you saw countries start to speak up. You saw leaders in the motherland start to say that they were not going to allow things to happen. So I think that the minister's influence is a lot bigger than people think. And I would not doubt that some of these players and some of the entertainers are getting their information from the minister and maybe other people in the Nation of Islam and other people in general, but starting to use their minds and use their influence, and also to take the time and do some research so that you are not a puppet and just spewing out what somebody has put in your sound check, but to think through what you're saying and to process your own life, I think are some beautiful things. And I think for me, I think it started with Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I think we have to continue to give him credit. Some people may not be able to say that publicly, but for me and those of us who can, I think we have to mention it as much as we can possible, because we will never let anybody make the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan as if he's not relevant.
Yes, sir. Now, last night, New York City put into effect a vaccination mandate for healthcare workers.
Yes.
These healthcare workers, or there are some who have already, but healthcare workers who refuse to get the shot will be replaced by the National Guard and foreign workers. What effect will this mandate have on that city?
Well, like I've said on many occasions, from my vantage point, when it comes to the medical field, there are usually ideas that start in California or New York. And of course, I'm not saying those are the only places, but those are two pretty common places where certain ideas in medicine tend to spread across the whole country. And so I'm thinking that there are going to be some very vocal people from New York, because there have been a lot of people in writings and other little things happening. But I think this is going to turn up the heat for them to be vocal. I think that there's going to be a certain percentage of the vaccinated that are going to see that this is not, it shouldn't have come to this point. And I'm sure there's some that are going to support it. But I think those that are unvaccinated and those who support them, New York has so many people and has so many healthcare facilities in that city, it's going to be a pretty large pushback. And so, I'm thinking that there are a lot of people around the country that are watching, just like they were watching in Houston when the healthcare employees at Methodist stood up. That was not a positive outcome, but people are going to be watching New York to see how they're going to deal with this. And I think people are going to start using this as a blueprint, but I also think this is going to be the spark of this revolution that we're talking about. And it doesn't mean that it's going to happen in the way sometimes we think about revolution, but this is a revolution that's starting with people making a decision first.
Right. The revolution starts in the mind.
That's right.
Yes,
That's
sir.
right.
One thing that we also have been discussing in the news recently is the booster shot. Now that the booster shot is becoming a reality, will we see similar mandates for the booster shot in cities around the country?
Yes, I think that's what is happening, right? Because I know I saw something about Biden getting a booster shot. The scientists right now, and especially scientists that the FDA rely on, they're not convinced. They all are still in a place of having more information coming from what's happening to people out here. The VAERS reporting system, the myocarditis, the problems with women in their cycles. They really are looking at these things. And of course, if we continue to have people get booster shots, then these problems that people are having with these adverse effects, they're going to get worse, or they're going to increase in number. Yes. Or maybe individuals may start having more problems than maybe one or two. And so I think there are a lot of scientists that kind of want to pump the brakes and kind of look at things a little more, whereas it's obvious that the government and a lot of these states are just full-fledged wanting to push forward. And so this is just another example of how there's going to be a separation. There's going to be a separation of one idea versus the other. And people are, I think, for the most part, going to stand on their foundation and aren't going to move away until they're able to see more. And so I think that's what I'm looking at, and that's what I'm expecting.
Okay. Now, Dr. Akili, one last question before we, maybe two, before we close out today. One of the things that we want to discuss is with the tracking of the information on the VAERS site. There have already been adverse reactions. Now that the booster shot is becoming a reality, as we just discussed, does a booster shot, for lack of a better term, reset the adverse reactions at all? Is it possible to see new reactions that have never been reported?
The honest answer is I don't know. We're still looking, learning, and there's so much investigation into what this new technology, the mRNA technology, is doing. I think we're not even sure of everything about that yet. And now we're talking about adding more of this spike protein into people's bodies. And we have to understand that many scientists are saying that the spike protein itself is what is a large part of the toxicity that's causing a lot of these adverse events. And so just from understanding how the body works and what is going to happen if you put more toxicity or more of a problem into a body, it's going to have less of an ability to fight. And so you either deteriorate and have worsening of your symptoms, or you have deterioration and then you have multiple symptoms. And so, again, I don't know exactly. I can't speak on science because we don't have any idea yet. But those are my concerns, is that the things that people are dealing with the vaccine itself are going to get worse as you continue to put more and more and more of this into these bodies.
Okay. All right. Understood, sir. And finally, what is new with the Ultimate Wellness Group?
Well, tonight we have a wonderful show. There are two young future physicians that I've been working with for a few years, and they just recently got accepted to medical school. And so we're going to have a celebration of them tonight on blackstream.live/TUWG. So come on and join us. We're going to ask some questions, just have a good conversation with two people who are aspiring to be doctors and did not do it the traditional way. And so we're going to have a discussion and hopefully open people's minds to, before we can separate from our enemy in the way that they try to control us in every aspect, we have to separate from them in our mind. And so we have to stop allowing their ideas and their format of doing things continue to put us in a box. So we're going to talk about being free and looking at your educational experience in a way that fits you and not that fits somebody else's agenda.
Yes, sir. Dr. Akili, as always, thank you for your insight on tonight. We look forward to hearing more from you next week.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Yes, sir. Let's pause for announcements from our sponsors. Coming up, Sister Sherrie Muhammad will join us to explain how independent education plays a major role in our separation from a falling America. We'll be right back.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Go to nnvnews.com/donate.
Worldwide, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Download the Final Call Radio app and take us everywhere. On your phone, on your computer, on your tablet, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also log on to finalcall.com and click the Listen Live button, or finalcallradio.com. Final Call Radio, the official voice of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam.
Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Follow us on social media at NNV News, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel at National Network View. I am Anissa Muhammad with NNVnews.com.
It is essential to recognize the role independent education plays as the fall of America is at hand and we begin to separate from this current system. Joining us to discuss is Sister Sherrie Muhammad, founder and director of Asiatic Minds Online School. Greetings, Sister.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Rosalind.
Walaikum salam, ma'am. What role can independent education play as part of our separating from this current system as the fall of America is at hand?
Well, first, thank you so much, Sister Rosalind and NNV News for having me back on. The role that independent schools can play is to actually help our students' minds turn in the direction of doing for self and setting up our own world, our own system, our own government. And it would take a actually good curriculum in order to do that. As long as the independent school has that, then we can begin to bring our children's minds out of the construct of the world that we are currently in. Because as we all know, education is how we go into the future. So if you look at the current world that we're in now, there's all sorts of people who invest in education and they are involved in education because they know it's going to uphold the world that they are building and it's going to create the new minds coming up, and they want to influence those minds into their way of thinking in order for their world to exist. Well, if we are separating, we must do the same thing in that direction. We must bring our children's minds out of the thinking of this world and into the thinking of God. And that way they can begin to utilize and see how they can utilize their skills, gifts, and talents in order to build a society and a world of their own.
Yes, ma'am. Now, what are the benefits of independent education? Are independent schools more likely to nurture intellectual curiosity and stimulate personal growth? What would you say to that, Sister Sherrie?
I think that's the goal of independent education. Once again, it's going to go back to if you have good teachers, if you have a good curriculum in order for that to happen. Because quite naturally, there's probably going to be independent schools that exist now that actually perpetuate exactly what's happening in public schools, right? But if you have, it depends on what is at the root of your independent school. And if you have an independent school that is wanting to go in a different direction, yes, it's going to allow that space for that nourishment of that intellect, for that natural curiosity to grow and actually help to dictate some of the assignments that are given, to iterate the lessons that are being taught. It's really a great opportunity. I was reading this, the Teachings 2.0, and the minister, there was a question where a school teacher said, a school teacher said, what do you think is the most important thing that I should teach the students in my class? And the minister responds, teach them as best you know the knowledge of self, as one who takes a picture first looks to see the self. The more one sees oneself in the acquisition of knowledge, the more interested one becomes in acquiring knowledge. So if you have a curriculum that does that, especially in an independent school, you're going to have a lot more breadth in there that you're going to be able to allow that child to explore, to grow, and to see themselves, thereby becoming a lot more interested and invested in their own education.
Yes, ma'am. Now, recently, school has begun, and enrollment was, I know you got a lot of inquiries about enrollment. Did you see or have you found that parents are becoming more inclined to enroll their children in independent schools, such as yours?
I would say yes. And one of those reasons is because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, a lot of parents are not ready to put their children back in a brick and mortar school. So you have a lot of parents and Black parents who, as they are seeking out an independent education, they want one that is going to cater to their children, to their ideologies. to their way of life. And so, yes, I've had a great influx of parents inquiring about Asiatic minds. And so, and I was actually doing some research as well. And yes, in independent school enrollment is definitely up.
Mhm. Do independent schools encourage closer connections? I know you spoke of the pandemic, but aside from that, would you say that independent schools and online schools encourage closer connections between educators and their students than public schools do?
I would say so. And especially, I would say, especially like at Asiatic Minds, those schools, if you're in an online school that is designed to be online, then those educators care about those students, and they're seeing them right there in their own environments. They have that opportunity that if they could either raise their hand or they can send them a private chat right in that classroom to address any issues that the child may have, and vice versa. The teacher may be able to see something and send a little chat, how are you doing today?
Right.
Looking a little sad. So there is that opportunity for the instructors to have a much closer relationship with the children.
And speaking of closer relationships, we know that historically, one thing that's been studied is the student to teacher ratio and how important that number is. Is there a difference in the student to teacher ratio at Asiatic Minds versus a brick and mortar public school?
I would say yes, because at Asiatic Minds, we're really striving to keep that student to teacher ratio at around 15 for our core classes. On our Friday classes, it's the entire student body, but it's our classes that require, you may work in groups, you may, do activities that is not as concentrated that you're going to need that small group attention that you would need in math and science and language arts. So at Asiatic Mind, we strive to hover right around that 15 students per instructor.
Oh, perfect. And then finally, how does the student to teacher ratio affect their performance in the independent school?
So what I love about that ratio is that nobody can hide. So the teacher, you can see everybody and have that time to call on each student to make sure that they are being accountable for the information that is being taught, and to pull them into the conversation if they're a little shy about it or if they're a little hesitant. And then it also, what I love seeing in the classroom is not only does the teacher pull in that particular student, but also other students, can take the point and re-explain something that was given. And so they're helping to teach their classmates, and it forms that bond within the classroom. So yeah, having that smaller classroom, I think it takes away uh, feeling that maybe a little frightened as a student when there's so many eyes watching you in a larger classroom. But
Right.
you can have more of an intimate group that you form bonds, and then you can build this trust, and then you can open up as a student and feel comfortable if you don't quite get something, and you have that space and opportunity and those brothers and sisters with you there to be able to help you through what you may need to understand better.
Great point. Now, Sister Sherrie, one thing that we know across the board is that our schools need more money, more funding. How does our financial support for independent education assist us in our separation?
Well, our support financially is that freedom isn't free. We can't expect anyone else to come and bail us out. We have to make it our business to do just as the philanthropists do in this world, just as big business does in this world. They finance their institutions because, once again, they know that they're planting seeds to further their way of life, their society. And we must do the same thing If we are striving to separate, to have our own society, then we must fund that. And that means funding education. That means our teachers need to be paid well so that they don't have to work 3 and 4 jobs in order to survive. And we know as a people we can do that. It's all it takes is for us to put in, our dollars. If everybody contributes a little, no one person has to contribute a lot. So it does not even matter if you have a child in school or not. You can still pay some charity. You can still contribute to a school, whether it's Asiatic Minds, whether it's Torchlight Academy, whether it's MMESA, whether it's MUI. There's plenty of us out there that definitely need the support of those of like minds. And we as a people, we have to value education enough to invest in it. We must put our eggs in that basket and not just depend on striving to get government funding for everything that we do. But we're blessed enough to make money. And so if we have money coming through our hands through a job, a portion of that we must invest in our own future. And
Yes,
education
ma'am.
is a huge part of that.
You raised a great point. That is so important that many of us are working 3 and 4 jobs just to sustain. But one of the things that we overlook quite often is the value of our education. So thank you for saying that. How
Yes.
can parents reach you? I know the school year has begun, but how can parents reach you in order to donate or inquire about the next session?
So they can go to the website, AsiaticMinds.com. That's AsiaticMinds.com. And there is a donate tab there. We have started school, but we have just a couple of slots before the door closes, and that's in a timely manner. After that, we are starting our waiting list for next school year because we have some wonderful changes coming up, or some expansion, coming up, and some very exciting things. So if you were not able to get into Asiatic Minds this school year, that waiting list is going to be up very soon on the website. But you can also go on the website Asiatic Minds and send me a message. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anyone who is interested and has a few questions even before putting their name on the waiting list. But in the meantime, please feel free to donate. We will have some initiatives coming out where people are going to have the opportunity to donate and contribute to Asiatic Minds in a wonderful way. So thank you. And once we are gearing up for that, I would definitely be back if you all have me to make those announcements.
Of course. All right. Thank you, Sister Sherrie, for your insight and just keeping us abreast on what's happening with online and independent schools such as yours and others everywhere.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Sister Rosalind. Thank you, NNV News. And of course, thank you to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and his beautiful family for your great sacrifice in order that we may be here today, that I may be sitting here right now talking about Asiatic Minds. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you. And thank you for joining us today and tuning into National Network View News. Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Follow us on social media at NNV News, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, NNV News. This is Rosalind Parks with National Network View News. Good night.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Go to nnvnews.com/donate.